Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Morning Shot. Before we start, can I ask you a favor, please? Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel to help us do all the usual things that we like to do on YouTube and help promote the video. So, onto the video itself. Ramaphosa came out and he had his usual speech. This is the speech where he opens Parliament and tells us what exactly he's going to do now in the 7th administration. And during that speech, he highlighted 9 key areas. And those key areas were a focus on job creation, growth, and a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Yeah, we heard that one before. He said a minimum program was agreed by all the GNU parties. He said unity will be the key feature of the 7th administration. He vowed to stabilize all the metros and restore service delivery. He vowed to intensify infrastructure investment. He said that he would make more basic food items VAT exempt and rejig the fuel formula, because fuel and the cost of fuel has a massive impact on the cost of living in South Africa. He claimed to be reworking the NHI. He said that they would use technology to fight crime. And finally, he said that he would convene a national dialogue for all of us to discuss what's wrong with the country. Many of us know exactly what's wrong with the country right now. So now that we've got the summary out the way, let's look at what he actually said. The first line, which I'm going to quote, is that all the way at the start of his speech, he says, "We are reminded on this day that we have a responsibility to each other, and our well-being and our happiness cannot be separated from those of our fellow woman and man. We are reminded that as we strive and progress and prosper, we are responsible for ensuring that no one is left behind." Now, I must admit, I take umbrage to this entire statement, because I'm not responsible for anybody else. I'm responsible for myself. This is a very typical communist type idea. We're all responsible for each other, except we're not. We're actually responsible for our own good. I'm my own first responder. I'm responsible for looking after my family. You can't constantly shift the responsibility off the individual and place it on the state. That's exactly how we land up in the problem that we are right now, where the state is committed to doing too much and the state is incapable of doing it. What you need to do is shift everybody's focus back to the individual responsibility for them to take charge of their own life. That's what the government should be doing, but that's not what communists do. The second is the line around the statement of intent, where Ramaphosa basically says that everybody has agreed to upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. But there is a key point in this, which is basically that he claims everybody has agreed to this minimum program. So everything that we're talking about effectively is the brainchild of everybody underneath the GNU, whether it be the DA, the IFP, or the Patriotic Alliance. So let's go on to the whole point about job creation. First thing he says is that they're going to work on the National Development Plan, Vision 2030. Now, I must admit, I've been covering news for a long time, and I've heard this phrase, the NDP, for a very long time. And South Africa has deindustrialized. It hasn't industrialized. So one would ask the logical question, and that is, possibly the plan just doesn't work. Instead, we have the usual communist idea, just try harder. And next time, trust me, bro, it will be better. Now, in an act of self-reflection, Ramaphosa does then go on to say that after 30 years of democracy, we've had no real economic growth. And I must say that this is kind of not true. We did have economic growth underneath Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki. We did not have economic growth underneath Jacob Zuma and now Cyril Ramaphosa. And you may be inclined to ask yourself why that might be. Well, that's because a lot of the plans put in place by Thabo Mbeki, in other words, BEE and the other state capture type things, were really kind of put into fruition underneath Jacob Zuma. And Cyril Ramaphosa just conserved them. He didn't really get rid of them. All those initiatives have killed the economy. So the question then should become, what are we going to do to get rid of them? Well, before we can even consider that, we have to think about this idea that the ANC keeps saying. The ANC love to use this idea of inclusive economic growth. You can see it right here in the line that he quotes. But I've got to ask you the question, inclusive of what? This is the usual communist line, always inclusive. But inclusive of what? There are no laws that discriminate against black individuals, disabled individuals, or women. There are no laws in the Republic that stop anyone from doing anything. So, the key fundamental question then is, if we want to increase growth, what are we going to do about BEE? One of the main bedrocks against growth. Well, I'm not really sure we're going to do anything. Look, it's not really directly said that we're going to do more of it. Kind of is, but it isn't. And what the president actually said is that growth must be inclusive. It must be transformational. For those of you who don't recall, transformational is just another way of saying, B. He then goes on to actually talk about empowering black South Africans and women. It's always black South Africans and women in general. The white South Africans, as we all know, according to the ANC government, are just super privileged. and they don't need anything. In fact, they need to be almost handicapped so that they don't continue with the advantage that they have. But that's not really how it looks to many youngsters. Many youngsters, regardless of whether they're white or black, are unemployed. The president highlights that there is a constitutional imperative to redress the imbalances of the past. But as we covered on previous videos, we have to ask the question, where's the cutoff for this? Is anybody that was born after 1994 no longer subject to the historical imbalances? They have been given many advantages and they've got to go through the schooling system just like everybody else. Well, as we've seen in many instances, some people in the ANC like it, some people don't. So we don't really know where the cutoff for this is. And this in itself needs to be an area where we actually need to consider this going forward, because BEE can't remain in place forever. The president then goes on to draw reference to the hard-won rights of the workers. Yeah, this is basically COSATU. So COSATU were very scared that going into the GNU, that the ANC would give away all the workers' rights. This is the ANC basically saying, don't worry, we won't. The president then goes on to say that what we are going to do is we are going to employ capable and qualified people to senior positions in metropolitans and in the municipalities. Yeah, that'd be lovely. So does this mean that we're having a degree of meritocracy over cadre deployment? Now, we're all aware that this was one of the key foundational points of the DA. The DA said they would only work with the ANC if the ANC got rid of cadre deployment. So is this the ANC's way of saying we will and we'll go to meritocracy? It remains to be seen, because if we go back to the BEE point, then one has to ask the question, if the white guy is the guy who should be employed because he has the most experience, will you stop it happening because employing him would be anti-transformational? Going on then to infrastructure. We all know that infrastructure in South Africa is not exactly doing its best. And we saw the line come out of Dean McPherson when he was employed to look after infrastructure, that he wanted to create the entire South Africa and make it look like a construction site with the existing infrastructure, not building new ones, not renting new ones, fixing what we already have. And this actually was one of the key foundational points that led to the Lekgotla in the first place, the ANC's big, massive meeting to discuss what they're actually going to do. Because there were certain parties in the ANC that didn't like that line. Looks like Dean's won, because the line is now included in Cyril's speech. When he was at the time asked, why would you not want that to be a key focus of your government? But hey, I don't understand ANC logic any more than you do. But in any case, one has to ask the question, so where's the money coming from? Well, the answer is the government doesn't have any money to improve the infrastructure. So what we can see is that Cyril's basically talking again of, that public-private partnership, which is basically the government's way of saying we're going to go to the private industry and ask them to fix our stuff, because we can't afford to. Going then on to minerals. He basically says that we need to stop exporting our minerals, and what we actually need to do is process our minerals. Minerals are a big part of South Africa's economy. We struggle with the railways to actually get them out. We have whole ports designed to just extract our minerals. And wouldn't it be better if we just processed our minerals on site, turn them into goods, and then ship them out? Like China does, I suppose, except they don't really have the minerals anymore. Well, Ramaphosa appears to be giving a pledge to do just that. This pledge was actually something that Gator McKenzie was very keen on. One of the key points of the Patriotic Alliance is that they wanted there to be more local economic development in terms of refining minerals into core products, and less just refine it elsewhere to be made in China and then buy the goods back. Typical fashion, there's no point industrializing if you can't really get anything out, so Ramaphosa gave a commitment to fixing the railways. Because without a capable railway, you can't really send your goods anyway. One has to ask the question then, what's actually going to happen with the ports? Because without a functioning port to ship them abroad, you can send them to the harbour. Are they just going to sit there? Coming then on to that idea of industrialising. In a country like South Africa, we commonly think to ourselves, if we have more electricity, we could create more. And in some instances, that's true. But we are a water-scarce country, and the president acknowledges that. Without fixing our water infrastructure, which across the country is in dire shambles, we can't really manufacture more. So the president has given a commitment to fixing the water issues that we have, doing some water reforms, and hopefully having more water available to people like steel smelters or industrial players that want to create goods using metal, which all need water. Even plastic welding needs water, so does glass. If you want to do any welding or industrial manufacturing of any variety, you're going to need water, and the president says he's going to fix it. But what we did see underneath the Sixth administration is the introduction of BEE rights over water usage. You may recall that. So hopefully what he means by water fixing isn't just, more of the same. The president then goes on to talk about, green energy and all that kind of rubbish. I'm really not going to cover that because we've covered that numerous times on Morning Shot. However, there is a line in here that does concern me, and it's a line that draws reference to digital currencies and digital ID. Both of these WEF type globalist ideas. Why are we drawing reference to digital IDs? We should probably just fix IDs in the first place. Like, South Africa has a serious undocumented problem. And then we come into digital IDs and the digital economy. Well, we know that when they refer to digital money, what they really mean is CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which is a globalist type plot. Why do we want those? South Africa is a country that historically uses cash. So what then of visas? Well, apparently we're going to fix visas. Visas is actually really important for economic growth. If you are a foreign investor and you want to come here and set up a business, you need to spend time in South Africa, which requires a visa. And if that time in South Africa is extended, you need an extended stay, possibly a permanent residency, especially if you have skills that the country deeply desires. But the moment you can't get that passed, we know that there are hundreds of thousands of visas in a backlog that can't get processed. Ramaphosa is promising that don't worry, we will process these visas. And in doing that, what will actually happen is that we will get more skill into the country and improve tourism. So what's in the government budget? Well, according to Ramaphosa, what they're going to do is stabilize the debt. They're not going to borrow more. They've borrowed a lot already. And we get the usual basic promise of, don't worry, we'll be more responsible with the fiscus. We hear this every single speech that ever gets made. So one has to ask the question, will it happen when it comes time to the civil servant salary reviews? Well, usually it doesn't. When we get to that process, what typically tends to happen is the government caves and we give above inflation pay rises because we don't want to burn the place down with the civil servants. The IMF and frequent rating agencies highlight around this very problem. And it never gets fixed. The president then goes on to talk about poverty. He says that we need to reduce poverty. One of the big issues in South Africa is asset poverty, typically the transfer of wealth between families. Well, property has been under threat in South Africa for a very long time, with the Section 25 of the Constitution threat that went forward and the idea that the EFF wanted to nationalize all land. Well, Ramaphosa says he's going to address this and he's going to issue more title deeds. That, again, remains to be seen, because if you do that, then again, this idea of redistribution of wealth and the government owning all the land tends to disappear. The more people who own land, the less inclined that they are to, give it back to the government. So this then go on to the final two big draws against the fiscus. The first is the basic income grant. Well, one has to look at that and say, what does the government want to do? And actually, we don't really know. The government says, and I quote, "We will use this grant as a basis for the introduction of a sustainable form of income support for unemployed people to address the challenge of income poverty." And that specific grant that they're drawing reference to is the social relief grant, which is commonly referred to now as the prelude to the big. Will they scrap it? Well, according to this, maybe not. But will it become an unemployed grant or will it become a basic grant? We don't know. But the grant is still there. So on to that moment that everybody wants to know. What's happening with NHI? Well, according to Ramaphosa, he's going to revisit it. What he wants to do is get consensus between all players. Now, we did say, even at the formation of the GNU, that the DA and many of the others actually didn't have a problem with the NHI. What they had a problem with was the outlawing of the private sector and placing all the funds in the government's hands. Previously, the Minister of Health, Joe, basically said that if there was a private sector, the NHI wouldn't work, and that's why he was committed to it. So now going forward, will they give the private sector a more important role within the NHI? If they do, it will alleviate many of the concerns of fellow South Africans. However, it still doesn't address the issue of the funding model. So what will actually happen, we don't know. But it's likely that NHI will be revisited and a watered-down version will be given to the public, to get consensus and buy-in and stop people from panicking and leaving to go abroad. Finally, the president starts to say the usual stuff, which we've heard a million times before. He's going to get some data out there and some technology to fight crimes, and this will make South Africa Wakanda. However, there is a line at the end of his speech that I want to draw reference to, and it's actually what he calls the commitment to reconciling. Now, I found this entire reconciling narrative to be rather disingenuous. For the longest time, underneath the 5th, 6th, 4th administration, what we typically saw was a lot of bell-pottinger type attitudes towards white South Africans and minorities in general. And those attitudes were, we don't want you here, you're all foreigners in this land, you must go home, right? We've all heard that. We've all seen it on Twitter or X. We've all seen it on Facebook. We've all seen it out of the very political parties who claim to want to represent us. And as a result, during the last census, we saw that the number of whites and minorities in the country drastically decreased. Everybody knows of somebody who's immigrating. usually for economic reasons. With that being said, you can't have reconciliation when the very people that you want to reconcile with, you're basically trying to drive into the ocean. That's not how it works. So one has to ask the question, how do you want reconciliation when the very people you want to reconcile with, you're trying to make extinct? That's not reconciliation. That's revenge. And so if the government actually wants to reconcile with minorities in the country, minorities are more than willing. The government has to stop many of the legislative changes that they do, many of the legislation that they put in place, which prohibits them from doing that. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do we take from this initial speech? Well, for me, personally, it's just more of the same. I've heard the same speech many, many times before, as I'm sure have you. Will the government finally deliver on it? Will they actually make good on their promises? Your guess is as good as mine. Possibly, with the GNU involved, there's more incentive for the government to actually deliver on the promises that they make. Will that actually happen? I haven't got a clue. But we can only but hope.